And I've played just under 30 hours of Last Epoch now, and I've leveled all 4 classes through the main campaign. I've taken both the Mage and the Sentinel through the end game systems, so I'm feeling fairly confident to give my thoughts on the beta as it is so far. This is a rough review. I've written up a full Google document, which I will be sharing, so if you want to see my notes fully written down, you can. I'll also probably post on Reddit or forums or something, because feedback is always helpful. So, I'll be showing a mix of gameplay and reading from my document, just to give you an idea of how much stuff we have prepared. There's roughly a 4-page write-up, and I've broken everything down. Most important thing, just to start, let's talk about the monetization. So, monetization for Last Epoch at launch will cost $15. You can currently fund it now and buy a $10 one at launch. But to get into the beta, you either need to get a code from being a streamer or a giveaway, or you need to purchase a $35 supporter pack. Now, you can purchase the game on Steam, and that will come with a supporter pack. And then you'll have a system very much like Path of Exile, where there's an MTX store, and the MTX store will fund future releases. There'll be no convenience upgrades, such as XP boosters or stash tabs. Also, there will be a free trial coming at some point during the beta. They've done open trials during the alpha and stuff. So if you do want to desperately play during the beta, but you don't want to spend any money on it, there is the option to get in for free that way. And when the game goes live, there'll be the free trial with a level cap of 20. So, getting into it. So, classes, as you saw, there are 4 classes currently in the game. There are plans for 5 in total. The 5th class is the Rogue, which isn't yet out. Now, each class has got 5 action bars and passive skill trees, all of which I'll break down in a little bit. So you have your base class, so I am a Sentinel, and I have the Sentinel skill tree. And then you have 3 additional, all having different focuses. So there's the Void Knight, the Forge Guard, and the Paladin. An example for the Rogue, they'll have a tree focused on dual-wielding weapons, bows, and traps. Right, so you kind of get an idea there. Now, the passive skill tree is very reminiscent of Vanilla WoW, in my opinion. So you have the base, 20 skill points that you put into your base class tree. Once you put 20 skill points in here, you then unlock the additional trees. Now, you can spread your points evenly across all of them. As you can see, I've got a mix of Forge Guard and Paladin, or you can focus all in on one. Every 5 points you put in, you then unlock additional abilities. So you can see that you unlock abilities through leveling up and through spending points in these passive skill trees themselves, as you can see here. So if you're like, oh, I really want this ability, well, maybe I need to put 5 points into Forge Guard and then spend more points into Paladin. Fairly complex, but if you've played PoE before, you're probably used to pretty overwhelming skill tree systems. Now, the abilities themselves are very interesting. So the abilities have skill trees. The plan is that every single ability will have a full skill tree. Currently, since the beta isn't finished, some abilities don't have skill trees yet, but to give you an example, we'll look at Vengeance. So, as you can see, I find the system very similar to the Diablo 3 rune system, or the artifact weapon system from Legion. You can put a maximum of 20 skill points into each ability, and since you have a limit of only 5 abilities on your bars, it's very interesting seeing the different kinds of builds that people come up with. And you can see that I've specialized, all of them have slightly different trees here, and there's lots of mixing and matching, coming up with the perfect playstyle for you, what you find fun. So there is a lot of complexity here. If you liked Path of Exile's gem system, great. This is more complex than the PoE system, just because of currently the PoE system has its limitations. This has got way more scope endgame, so there's a lot more you can mess around with, which I really appreciate. Now, you can reset both your skill specializations and your passive skill tree, so it's not possible to brick your character. To respec your passive skill tree, there's a vendor that you spend gold to that will reset it, and then you can de-specialize in your ability, which will reset everything back to level 1, and then you should grind it back up. It's very quick to grind it back up at endgame, but since there is a gold price attached and a time price attached, it's not completely free to swap around at will. So yeah, if you have just one Sentinel, You could have, this is my one Sentinel who's a Paladin, then you'd have like 2 more to be a Forge Knight and a Void Knight. But you could just have one and constantly respec it back and forth if you had enough gold and or time to be hopping around all over the place. Getting into the controls and the combat. Last Epoch has the very standard, as you can see, top-down click-to-move system. Use your keybinds. Stuff happens. Also, one point to quickly say, Whirlwind or Cyclone feels much better in Last Epoch than it does in Path of Exile currently. Hopefully 3.7 can address that. But yes, it feels actually really smooth. I'm going to turn the sounds right down, so I'm going to do some gameplay while we go through the combat talks. So here we have the Endless Arena, which we'll explain later, but let's just kill some mobs while we talk. Okay. So, every single class has its own short cooldown movement ability, and they all feel pretty snappy. As you'll see here, my one is Lunge on Q with a 2-second cooldown and 2 charges. It actually feels really smooth. Really, really good. That being said, though, the actual pathing is a bit buggy. It's possible to sometimes get stuck on corners, and the way that enemies move is a bit sloppy sometimes. So even though the actual abilities feel very seamless, and you can see that I'm, you know, comboing through different buttons and it all feels really good, the combat feels amazing, but the way that you actually move and the enemies move, it feels a bit rough. That being said, this is still a very early build, and as someone who played Path of Exile's beta, I'm fairly used to random issues. You'll also notice occasional lag. This is aware, the developers are very aware of the lag, and apparently there's a fix coming which will make load screens in particular feel much better, but it's just an ongoing issue which we'll just have to see what they do with it. Now, other than the awkward pathing, let's get into like the AI, because that's kind of related. So with melee monsters, it's very easy to gather a whole bunch of enemies and like build massive mob trains, line of sight around a corner, and then stack them all up on top of you. And it actually feels really fun. I had a lot of flashbacks to like doing dungeons in WoW. However, with ranged monsters, I've often had enemies just like constantly throwing their abilities into walls and just feeling a little bit stupid, which isn't the best. This is something that I only really noticed on the Sentinel character because I was going for this very tanky playthrough. But for everything else, it wasn't really an issue. So you'll notice it to varying degrees based on your playstyle and your build, so on and so forth. Right. Now, the combat is a lot more than just spinning to winning. I purposely picked this character to show it to you because it's a very easy one. It doesn't require much thought. I'm also playing a very tanky character, so I can kind of just stand here and not really do very much. Now, the enemies use a mix of telegraphed ground attacks and projectiles, as you can see here. So a lot of it is about dodging stuff on the floor rather than just face tanking everything. That being said, I made a super tanky paladin all around blocking on healing, so I can sort of face tank, but if I do just face tank, I die. So you can see that a lot of it's like, okay, what do I need to dodge? What do I need to move around? The combat feels very responsive in that sense. So it's actually really good once you get past the somewhat janky animations and the rough around the edges finish. Okay, so let's get into a couple of hitbox issues very briefly. So the hitbox of certain NPCs feels slightly off. It's not always the case, like I can just click on you and it all feels great. But sometimes I've noticed with certain NPCs, I'm clicking on them, it's not doing exactly what I want them to do. I'll click on my stash. And it just feels like sometimes stuff is slightly misaligned. I noticed it with picking up items in particular. It's not constant. You can see most of the time it's fine, but it happens just enough that it drives me crazy. So hopefully they can work out what it is. It's also a very common problem, which people report, so it's not just me. It also might be an issue where, as I said, that the movement skills feel very snappy, so my lunge, I dash into an enemy. Sometimes it throws me slightly too far into the enemy. So when I'm then using my single target attack, I'm kind of like missing it. A lot of the pure single target skills, you feel like you should be connecting, but you're not. It's very odd. But anyway, so let's get into the campaign. So the campaign consists of the usual fairly linear act-based system, as you can see here. Now, one of the cool things about Last Epoch is sort of around time travel. So you can see that you actually have the same area in 4 different time periods, and you're traveling backwards and forwards through time, re-experiencing the acts with different layouts, different enemy types, but the similar kind of landscapes. You kind of recognize certain terrain, but in one world it's completely overrun by the void, it looks completely different, whereas in another there's undead everywhere, and you're seeing how it's kind of changing. You can see like the divine and then the ancient seems much more like primal, and I think that's a really interesting gimmick. That being said, the campaign's not complete. It's hard to fully assess it. It's a little bit dull, a little bit bland. It's mostly just there because we need a campaign. We need a way to level up before we get into endgame. So maybe once it's fully fleshed out, it'll feel a lot more impactful. I will admit, when I first played through, when I first started time traveling through zones, I was very impressed, but it became stale quite quick. But it's not a fully finished experience, so I can't really judge it fairly. Alright, endgame. So as I showed you earlier, there are currently 2 out of 6 endgame systems. The arena, which was what I was doing earlier, spawns in endless waves of enemies, and then there's the Monolith of Time. Now, the Monolith of Time is kind of like a hybrid of Path of Exile maps and Diablo rifts. So as you can see here, you choose a timeline. So we have the Rune Shrine, and then we have the Serpentine Desert. So you pick one of 2 zones, and the zones have different mods on them. So this is completely random, and they give you rewards. You can see increased item rarity if a 50% increased damage, or increased movement speed and damage gives me 16% rarity. You pick the one you want to do, you run the objective, and then the modifiers stack up. And that's a really cool way. So it's much more simple than rolling your maps in Path of Exile, but there are still some choices, and then you chain your rifts together, and then you get rewards. Very cool. So it will be scaled to your current level. So I'm a level 62, I believe, Paladin. So this will be scaled to level 62, as you can see here, scaled. And you can just kind of run through the map, building up enemies. I like to go for my tanky version, so I stack up as many enemies as possible. And then you just run around looking for the end objective, which is usually kill the boss, or clear the chest, or basically kill the things. And then once you've done that, you are rewarded with a chest with a bunch of loot. And then you pick the next set of modifiers and you chain it along like that. Now, the arena system that I showed you earlier is currently the best source of XP in the game. This is a fairly large pack, so let's just AoE this down. And the way that you gain entry to the arena is through arena keys, which have a chance to be rewarded from the end chest. And as you can see, you know, while there is some lag every now and again, the amount of mobs I stacked up, that was actually pretty smooth. And a lot of ARPGs struggle with lag when it comes to massive packs. Like, if you're playing Herald of Ice build in PoE, you'll get some lag. If you're doing crazy pulls in Diablo, when you have all the numbers going, you get some lag. And yeah, I actually find this very fun, and again, very reminiscent of speedrunning dungeons in WoW. I really enjoy this playstyle. And I don't know if it's because I haven't played a game like this in a while. There's something just fun about grouping up all the enemies and then just hiding around the corner. I just find it particularly cool. I don't know. So now let's just AoE these down. Too much? No, we saved it. We saved it. Ooh. A little bit of lag. Okay. I don't know. I just find that quite fun. So as I was saying, one of the possible rewards from the Monolith of Fate is an arena key. Now, currently the arena keys are on a pure RNG system. But the devs have said that they might make it more deterministic. So maybe every 5 monoliths you run, you get a guaranteed key. Something like that, roughly. Now, we haven't got any endgame bosses to farm, sadly, but there will be more endgame systems to come. Again, very rough beta. But from all that is so far, I think it's got potential. I think it's kind of cool. Okay. Now, getting into the loot, the craft, and the trading. So as you've probably noticed, enemies sometimes drop loot. So let's see if we can get an enemy to drop some loot for this point. Currently, the loot in this game consists of gold, crafting materials, and then items, and also health potions. So gold is auto pickup, health potions are auto pickup, crafting materials you have to pick up manually, which I kind of wish was auto pickup. I feel like when you have auto pickup in a game, you do get spoiled somewhat. And then you have random items. So here you see added block armor. This is a affix shard. This is somewhat similar to the system we have in Path of Exile. Also, one thing worth noting, which is very cool about this game, is it has a sort item, so like an auto sort, and also an auto stash for crafting materials. And your crafting materials go to a special little window here. So the way that crafting works, if we look at the different items, and I got a pretty good example here, we have the usual normal, magic, rare, unique, and set items. So basically white, blue, yellow, orange, and then green for sets. Now, if I bring up the crafting window, I cannot craft onto unique items because it's locked. It's like trying to craft on a unique in Path of Exile. But if I had a rare helmet, for example, I could craft mods on there based on available slots. This currently doesn't have any, but you can kind of do stuff with it if you had an item with slots. This belt, for example. Right, so I could put a prefix on here, so I'd search for a prefix. And let's say I want some dodge rating, or I want some health regen, or armor, or so on and so forth. I would do it, and you can see there's a 100% chance for success. The crafting system's very interesting. So I don't actually want dodge on this, but I want glancing blow. So you craft, and we get tier 1. Now, in this game, the higher the tier, the better it is. The lower the tier, the worse it is. So if I was to spam craft this, the chance for success will go down. Now, this is like varling an item in Path of Exile. There are 3 potential items if you fail an item. If you fracture an item, it's still usable, but it cannot be modified any further. That's base 1. The second next thing that could happen is you fracture the item. It can't be modified any further, but then also the tiers go down, so the item becomes less powerful. And then the final one is you brick the item, you just like kill it, like dead. So if I forge again, it's fine. It's got 80% chance of success. Okay, pretty cool. 7% chance of success. And then there are these like glyphs or runes which then impact those. So here's like 7% chance of success. I don't really want to brick my item. I could put this in and it buffs the chance way back up to 95. Could do it again. 85. And there we go. So now we've got the max tier there, which is pretty cool. So that kind of gives you a very brief TLDR of how the crafting system works. Now, what is gold used for in this game? Gold is used for quite a few different things. Now, gold is used to purchase items from vendors. It's used to reset passive skill tree points by paying to have respec points. It's used to reroll modifiers on the Monolith of Fate. As you can see, if you don't like these, if these were both like really bad, you can press this button and it rerolls the mods. In the future, there's plans to have it so you can purchase additional stash tabs. Again, the MTX, like the store for this game, is purely cosmetic. There's no XP boost, there's no stash tabs. If you want to buy additional stash tabs, you'll be able to do so through gold. So only through stuff you earn in-game, which is very nice. Okay. Also, there are plans for a auction house-like system called the Bazaar, and the main currency for the Bazaar will be gold. Okay. Now, I'll get into the Bazaar a little bit, but we'll just talk about like the base things. Crafting materials are obviously used for crafting, as I showed with my beautiful camera blocking half it, but you get a rough idea. Items are used to be equipped or to be crafted upon. And then gold is used for, as I said, and then the Bazaar. So, the Bazaar is a little bit complicated, but this is kind of how it works. Players will only be able to list up to 5 items at a time on the Bazaar, and not all items will be tradable. So it's like a very limited soft auction house. Okay. Uniques, so unique items. Crafted items, so for example, this powerful belt. And then relics, which is an equipment slot, will not be tradable. The idea is the most powerful items will not be tradable, but for example, the crafting materials or the base items would be. So let's say that I found the best base helmet in the game, like a very high level base helmet I wanted to craft on. I could sell that to someone, or selling the rare crafting materials, or just selling like whatever items. So there is some trading. There is a soft auction house, but you can't use it to get the best items in the game, which personally I kind of like. Imagine if in Path of Exile, for example, there was an auction house, but only for currency items and essences, but then not for powerful rares and uniques, basically. Now, any purchase you make in the Bazaar will be using gold only. And basically what these limitations mean is it deters bots for one, so that's quite good. Also, it makes loot dropping and self-crafted gear feel very meaningful. And then it obviously maintains a gold sink, so gold always has some use, because once you've gotten a character you're happy with, you don't want to respec anymore. You end up just stacking up loads and loads of gold, and gold is fully shared between all your characters in the league, be it softcore, hardcore, or solo self-found, which this game has modes to support all three. Okay, let's get into the graphics and the sound design. So as you can see, it's not the best looking game in the world, but it actually has some surprisingly really good lighting features, and I find the environment detail really good. Like, for example, the lighting on this flower, the flames, this beautiful, like, starry background, the water effects. There's really nice lighting and environmental effects. So even though a lot of the animations feel very rough, when you keep in mind that this is a beta and this stuff is meant to be improving, I think there is potential for this to be a very good-looking game one day. Again, Path of Exile players were pretty used to the game looking pretty rough, and recently it's been looking really amazing with the global illumination changes. So if you're someone who's only ever played Diablo, this might look pretty rough around the edges for you, but considering this is a work in progress, I think it could have, you know, pretty good legs, and it's very, very reminiscent of Diablo 2. Very reminiscent of Diablo 2 in art style, in my opinion. Now, the devs are very aware of the fact that it's not the best looking game in terms of animations and everything. So they've said they are working hard on it, and they're not pretending this is the most beautiful game you've ever played. I like that. I like it when devs are open about the flaws of the game, or not necessarily the flaws, but the limitations. One thing which is a little bit sad, currently items in the game, there aren't loads of super unique 3D models. Again, Path of Exile players will be used to this. A lot of the unique items have their own custom models and everything, but different armor and everything doesn't. So not everything has a 3D model yet. This shield will look the same as this shield, for example. It's kind of whatever. Eventually they'll work on it, it'll get there, but right now in the beta they don't. Bit disappointing, but it's not the end of the world. When the game launches, there will be different 3D models for everything. Okay. Now, the OST is really good. I really like the OST in this game. I'll crank it right up so you can hear it just for a little bit. I find the general OST and ambience is beautiful. The sounds on the abilities and the combat is serviceable. Some of them sound okay. Some of them, like that, though, they just grate a little bit. Some of the sounds do just happen to just be like... I don't know. Not quite right, but there are lots of soft little scrolls and touches which sound just great, and some of it not quite. Work in progress that might improve. Overall, though, I feel fairly positive about the sound design in Last Epoch. So, let's go on to some of the more like general outsidey things. I was talking about the core gameplay and the systems. So let's talk about the devs in the community. Now, the devs are actually pretty amazing. So they've been very open to feedback, and they are incredibly active on forums, Reddit, Discord, and they often pop into random Twitch streams. That's a very good sign. When devs are being transparent like that, that's good. It's fairly expected with indies now, and we're very spoilt by companies like Grinding Gear Games being amazing. And as I'm recording this, I just got a message in chat. We just hired a full-time sound designer yesterday. I'm so excited to do a full revamp on them. So yeah, even when you're recording reviews, they pop into chat to say random things. So yeah. Had a very pleasant experience with Leroy, the guy who just happened to pop into chat. This is awkward now since we're talking about him. And I've also been offered dev interviews, and I will be featuring on a Last Epoch podcast at the end of the month with some lead devs and other streamers. As long as the communication between the player base and developers remains this consistent and transparent, then I see no reason for Last Epoch not to flourish within the genre. Also, it's worth just mentioning, I didn't pay for Last Epoch. They did give me a free code for it, but I have not been paid to do any reviewing of it. And I've done a full week of streaming it just because I've enjoyed it, and I've continued to make videos like this because, you know, I'm having fun with it. Another example of an ARPG where I got free codes for was Pagan. I played it, I liked aspects of it, it didn't really grip me, I didn't record a bunch of content for it on YouTube, so that should kind of give you an idea of where my opinions are coming from. So I'll give some closing thoughts, and I'll talk about some quality of life suggestions, and again, this document will be linked below the YouTube video if you want to go back over anything. So, despite some flaws, I think that Last Epoch genuinely is one of the most interesting skill and crafting systems that I've seen in an ARPG. Path of Exile will always be my go-to and my favorite, but I was never expecting to play another game and be like, oh shit, this has got something really cool that I've never seen before. It's been a really long time since I've gone into an ARPG and be like, I've never seen this before. It's a really cool feeling. Now, speaking of Path of Exile, which I've mentioned a lot during this, obviously as a main Path of Exile player, I think this could be the go-to Path of Exile companion game if the developers play their cards right and they manage to basically lay out everything they've set up and spoken about. Now, I've had conversations with members of EHQ, and post-launch they have plans for a PoE-like schedule, with their content dropping towards the end of each PoE league. So hypothetically, dates and times are kind of up in the air. So for example, a lot of Path of Exile players are randomly waiting for 3.7 to come out. You could be like, yo, what should we do? I've got a month to kill. Oh, look, Last Epoch just dropped a new patch with new content in it. Perfect. And then you have this nice, beautiful staggering where you've always got a game to be hopping between. Now, this is great for everyone. It's obviously great for Last Epoch because it puts them outside of direct competition with the genre leader being Path of Exile. It's great for Path of Exile because it's keeping people invested in the genre if this game really does pick up. And it means that ARPG fans always have a option with fresh content to enjoy within the genre while they wait for new PoE stuff. So if everything works out, there could be a very healthy symbiotic relationship going on. So hopefully it all kind of just like goes smoothly. Now, I'm just gonna like blast through some quality of life stuff which has just generally kind of annoyed me that I've touched on a little bit before, so I'll just bring up the document in full for this. Right. Tooltips lack information. Tooltips are in a very rough state. So, for example, with my cyclone-like ability, Warpath, it says the mana cost, it says the cooldown, but it hasn't got any damage numbers. Now, damage tooltips are pretty useless in Path of Exile, but you can use them as a rough idea of how to equip or chase certain statistics. There currently isn't like a path of building offline skill tree planners. Hopefully those third-party things will come with time, but as of yet, it's just very difficult to plan around that kind of stuff. And this makes a genre and a game which is very difficult to get into even more complex because we haven't got the information at hand. Minion players will know exactly what I'm talking about. Alright, okay. This is also very exaggerated by the character creation screen, which I'll show you in a little bit, but my game will crash showing it to you. There's lots of weird little bugs like that, so when I exit the game will crash. I'll then have to re-enter my password and stuff, and it's just not going to work very well. So let me just show you very quickly. These are all little beta bugs. Whenever you play a beta, you should expect some kind of bug to happen. But it will kind of like freeze up, resolution doesn't get remembered, it bugs out, it doesn't work. If I put my password back in, that doesn't work, so I actually have to close everything, start again. It's a little bit frustrating, but it's kind of whatever. Now, while I wait for it to log back in for the character creation thing to show you, there's a very big lack of visual feedback in general. So procs, buff effects, ailments, and there aren't buffs and debuff icons on the screen anywhere. Inexcusable in my opinion. I expect them to come eventually, but until we get more visual feedback, so much is just, I don't know what killed me. Now this game does actually tell you what killed you, which is nice having a death log like that, but it'd be nice being able to react to things rather than just, well, I know after the fact what happened, which isn't great. So, showing you the character creation, which is very reminiscent of Diablo 2. One of the best things about the game is how much this reminds you about D2. When you pick your character, big dramatic opening, guy comes forward and he's like, yo, I'm the Primalist, and these are my 3 specs. I'm like, sick, Primalist, let's go. This ability looks cool. Wait, there's no tooltip. Okay, well what about the cat? Oh shit, there's no tooltip for that as well. So while we have very pretty pictures, the pretty pictures don't tell me anything other than the fact that they're just pretty pictures. I'm sure there'll be tooltips eventually, but I want to know about the cat. So yeah, that's something that they definitely need to work on. Other things which have been quite frustrating with me, the chat and dialogue windows feel unfinished, and there's a lot of just generally overlapping interface windows. This is true of NPCs, crafting, and inventory windows. Small minor things. There's no mute and background while tabbed out option. Very nice for certain players. There's also no vendor protection. This is a really big one for me personally because I'm stupid, and I can show you this firsthand. So the binding to equip gear is right click. The binding to sell gear is shift right click. Now you can see what the problem is. So let's say that I'm not paying attention and I'm like not looking at my keyboard because I'm streaming, I'm recording a video or whatever. And then instead of putting my hand on shift, I put my hand on control or something, right? So I end up just equipping the item rather than selling the item. I've been in cases where I've accidentally equipped a random trash shield and then sold my good shield to the vendor. That's not great. So hopefully they either change the bindings or have a buyback feature or something to negate that. But yeah, selling good items when you're meant to be vendoring trash items is never fun. That's never a good thing. There should be something to do around that. Now, on that, Sidequest tracking is fairly poor, and there's generally a lack of map highlighting. So, going back to Path of Exile as the example, so in PoE, if I had a quest and an act, there would be like a golden circle around the zone. It's very easy to skip side quests when going through the campaign, and then when you're like, oh shit, I need to go back, and I know there was something in Act 1, which zone is it in? There's nothing telling you where to go. So you end up just reading your quest log, and it's just overly convoluted. It's a very small feature, but a small feature like that is massive when it comes to quality of life improvements. And the whole point of betas is to give quality of life improvements. So yeah. The minimap itself is also far too large and fairly useless unless it can be zoomed out. So if I show you this beautiful minimap, the minimap's huge, and I can use the arrow keys, but you have to use the arrow keys to see everything. So yeah, give me more minimap control. Otherwise, the minimap functions fairly beautifully, but it's just a minor nitpick. You also aren't able to preview passives and abilities from level 1. Apparently this is going to be fixed, which is good, but I struggled a lot when I was making my own character during the beta. And since, as I showed you, I couldn't see the tooltips on the character creation screen, I was like, I'll just make one of every class and then read the passives that way. I couldn't until I unlocked the abilities. And a lot of the abilities you don't unlock to quite a high level, so that was quite a big issue. This is a very personal and very minor thing. But the damage types and the stats feel slightly padded and could be trimmed. A lot of people will disagree with me. This is just my own personal opinion. But just to give you an example, you have 5 main stats. I come from a game which has 3 main stats. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 damage types. But then you also have stuff like bleed and ignite and whatever. I generally prefer games with much tighter ones. Maybe some stuff could be bundled together. A lot of people won't care. Me, I like very easy, very accessible, easy to read statistics, and then the complexity comes with how you interact with items and passives and abilities. It's a minor thing. The final point there is unlocking skill specialization seems to require too high a level. So you need 49 to unlock your final ability passive. So what I mean by that is here, right? So you have 5 abilities on your action bar. You can use 5 abilities as soon as you have 5 abilities. So you unlock abilities very quickly in the start, but then you don't unlock the skill trees until a very high level. This one is at like 34 something, and then this one isn't until 49. For context, you finish the current campaign low 30s. So obviously we haven't got the full campaign yet, but it feels a bit weird finishing the campaign and having to grind maps for 10 to 20 levels to then be able to specialize into all of your abilities. Also, there isn't like a clean number difference. I like games where it's like, okay, every level I'm getting this, every 5 levels I'm getting that. That was one of the things which felt very good about early World of Warcraft, is you had a very constant and steady progression stream. You knew exactly when you were going to unlock talents, when you're going to be unlocking ranks and skills. You want your game to feel predictable because it gives people, especially people who aren't invested into a game, new players, a reason to stick around. So, the system I would propose is every 5 levels you unlock new passive abilities by like, the skill tree. So it's kind of like a level 5 you can spec into your first, a level 10 your second, 15, 20, 25. This means that you'd be able to specialize into your abilities much earlier into the game, meaning you get into the build making aspect much earlier. This won't affect endgame at all. This will have no ramifications on the long-standing aspect of the game. It'll just make the early game more interesting, and it will make the gameplay more impactful earlier, meaning people get drawn into the game sooner. But anyway, those are my closing kind of thoughts. Just to summarize, Last Epoch is actually genuinely really cool. All of my like PoE streamer friends who I've spoken to have all spoken very highly of it, and also are all playing it themselves. So I think there's definite potential there, and I'm very curious to see how this game progresses. But anyway, I'm Tarke. Have a good day. Bye-bye.